Welcome back to another deep dive. I hope you're sitting somewhere comfortable right now.
Yeah, maybe grab a coffee or a glass of wine.
Right, or if you're commuting, stuck in traffic. If you are stuck in traffic, I promise what we're about to discuss is going to take your mind completely off the bumper in front of you. Because today, today we are getting a little bit weird.
We are definitely veering off the beaten path today. I mean, usually we're breaking down historical events or supply chains, but today we're kind of breaking down the walls of reality itself.
Exactly. We're aiming for a vibe today that is one part chilling X-Files investigation and one part relaxed fireside chat. Because we're talking about the paranormal, specifically remote viewing, telepathy, and the ability of the human mind, or just consciousness in general, to travel across space and time.
And I know, I could practically feel some of you rolling your eyes right now through the headphones.
Right. You're thinking, okay, here we go. Crystal balls and horoscopes. But I want you to just pause for a second. Before you switch over to a true crime show, I really want you to imagine a scenario.
Yeah, this is a crucial thought experiment, just to understand the stakes of what we're looking at here.
Picture this. The year is 1966. It's October. The world is a very, very different place. There's no internet, no social media updating you on your friends' lunches, no GPS tracking on your phone.
Long-distance phone calls were expensive and rare.
And the audio quality was usually complete garbage. If you aren't in the exact same room as someone, they effectively just disappear from your reality.
That's a really great way to put it. We totally forget how disconnected the world used to be.
So you are sitting in Elmira, New York. It's a quiet evening, around 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. You're in a living room. And in this room, there's a woman named Jane Roberts.
She was a writer, a poet, usually a very sharp, fully conscious person.
But right now, she has entered this deep trance state. She is speaking in a voice that is not her own, channeling an entity known as Seth.
And for those listening who maybe aren't familiar with this Seth material, we're not talking about some cheap Ouija board party trick here. Seth is an articulate, highly intellectual personality who dictated thousands of pages of complex metaphysical philosophy over decades.
Right, but tonight, on this specific night in October 1966, Seth isn't lecturing on the nature of the soul. He's doing something incredibly practical. He is essentially trying to act as a psychic surveillance drone.
He's attempting to project his awareness thousands of miles away.
Because while you were sitting in Elmira, your friends, Bill and Peg Gallagher, are on vacation down in Nassau in the Bahamas. You have absolutely zero way of communicating with them. You don't know their itinerary.
You don't know what hotel they ended up at.
You don't know what they ate for dinner. Nothing.
And yet, the entire goal of this session is for Seth to describe exactly what the Gallaghers are doing, seeing, and feeling right at that exact moment.
This is like the ultimate test of non-local consciousness. The question is so simple. Can awareness actually travel? Can it pick up on specific, trivial, completely mundane details across thousands of miles of ocean?
And not just broad strokes either. We aren't looking for vague things like, I see water or I feel sunshine.
Right, the Barnum effect.
Exactly. Statements so vague they apply to literally anyone on a tropical vacation. No, we are looking for the weird stuff, the highly specific stuff.
And that is the mission of today's deep dive. We are analyzing what is known in parapsychology circles as the Gallagher test. And our source material today is fascinatingly specific.
It really is.
We are looking directly at session 295 of the early sessions, book 7 of the Seth Material.
Along with the follow-up sessions, which are sessions 296 and 297, the dates of record here are October 19th, October 24th, and October 26th, 1966.
And we really should mention right up top, this material is published by the New Awareness Network. If you want to follow along or dig deeper into this, that is where you go.
Absolutely. We are quoting directly from the official transcripts provided by the New Awareness Network.
And just to keep the lawyers happy and the universe in cosmic balance, we have to state clearly that this deep dive is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We're here to explore the data, not to preach to you.
Precisely. We are just acting as analysts today. We have two sets of data in front of us. The transcript of the trance session in Elmira and the verified written logs of what Bill and Peg Gallagher actually experienced in the Bahamas. We're just looking for the matches.
So let's set the scene properly. Wednesday, October 19th, 1966, 9 p.m., Elmira, New York. Jane Roberts goes into a trance. The entity, Seth, starts speaking. The goal is to see what the Gallaghers are doing. Now, usually when you hear about psychic phenomena, it's super vague, right? Like, I see a dark stranger.
But that is absolutely not what happens here. Seth immediately dives into highly specific details. He opens with an image that is both visual and auditory.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that first impression. Seth says, and I'm quoting here, a saint here and a gorge. Or perhaps this is St. George.
Now hold on. Imagine you are the note-taker for this session. Jane's husband, Rob, is furiously writing this down. You write down St. George. It sounds like a specific name or a place.
Right, and when the Gallaghers finally come back from vacation and check the notes, what do they find? Because they definitely weren't staying at the St. George Hotel.
No, they weren't. But they verify that the Prince George Hotel was right near the dock where they were spending a ton of their time.
Okay, so St. George versus Prince George, that's close.
It's phonetically very similar. And this is actually a common feature in this type of phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's often called associative remote viewing or phonetic approximation.
Phonetic approximation.
Yeah, the signal comes through.
Yeah.
The raw concept of a royal or elevated title combined with the name George. But the conscious mind of the medium, or their vocabulary, tries to latch on to the closest familiar phrase it can find.
It's kind of like hearing a song through a really thick wall. You get the rhythm, you maybe catch the chorus, but you might mess up a specific word. You hear saint instead of prince.
Exactly. The George part is the anchor. The modifier was slightly off, but the actual location identifier was fundamentally correct.
It's like playing charades with a ghost. You get the concept, but you fumble the exact syntax.
That's a great analogy, actually. The information comes in as raw data, just impressions, sounds, feelings, and it has to be translated into English words by Jane's vocal cords. Errors in translation are completely expected.
But it gets more interesting and, frankly, a lot more confusing when we look at the transportation situation. Seth says motorcycles through streets or bicycles, but many other vehicles beside cars. Instead of cars, that is. And then he gets incredibly specific. He says, we rent scooter or cycle.
We rent scooter or cycle. That is a very bold prediction to make.
Did they that?
Well, here is where the timeline gets really weird. The Gallaghers verified that, yes, the streets were completely filled with motorcycles and surreys, those carriage-like things, rather than just normal cars. So that sets the visual atmosphere perfectly. But regarding the actual rental, they hadn't rented one yet.
Uh-huh. So it's a miss.
Not quite.
Yeah.
The Gallaghers verified that on that specific day, a Wednesday, they had planned to rent a scooter. They had been talking about it extensively. They fully intended to do it on Friday, but they didn't actually do it until Saturday.
So Seth picked up on the plan itself.
This touches on a really core concept in the Seth philosophy, the idea that thoughts and expectations have a literal reality to them. Seth even mentions a journey planned but not taken regarding the scooter rental. He is seeing the intent just as clearly as the physical action.
That is wild. It's like the Minority Report of vacation planning. He sees what you're going to do or what you want to do, even if you haven't actually physically done it yet.
It completely challenges our linear view of time. If you're deeply focused on a plan, does that plan exist in some energy form before it manifests in the physical world? In this case, Seth seems to suggest yes. The scooter rental was a real, tangible event in their minds before it was a real event on the asphalt.
I love that concept. It really makes you wonder how much of our reality is just the stuff we haven't gotten around to doing yet. Our to-do lists must look like physical, towering objects to these entities.
It's a slightly terrifying thought. My to-do list is a cluttered mess right now.
Mine too. It would look like a psychic hoarding situation. But let's move on to something a little less philosophical and more, well, carby.
Yes.
Yeah.
The loaf of bread.
Yes. This is honestly my favorite part of the whole transcript. Seth says, a loaf of bread. Do they bring a loaf of bread to their room?
It just sounds so absurd on its face. You're staying in a hotel in the Bahamas. Why on earth are you bringing a whole loaf of bread to your room?
Exactly. If I'm on a tropical vacation, I'm eating out. I'm eating fresh seafood, lobster, whatever. I am absolutely not hoarding a loaf of Wonder Bread in my hotel room. So surely this was a miss.
It was actually a direct hit. The Gallaghers confirmed it in their notes. They wrote, yes, we buy a loaf of bread for trip mentioned next. Trip by motorcycle.
No way.
Yes. They bought a literal loaf of bread to take on a picnic during that exact scooter trip they had been planning.
See, this is what I love about this case. If a psychic tells me I see a dark stranger, I just go to sleep. It means nothing. But if a psychic says, why is there a random loaf of bread in your hotel room, and there actually is one, that is undeniable.
You've hit on a crucial point in studying parapsychology. The trivial details are often the most evidentiary. Mundane facts, like a loaf of bread, a torn shoelace, a highly specific color of a hat, These are statistically so unlikely to be guessed by pure chance.
Right. If I just guess you went to the beach today while you were vacationing in the Bahamas, I have like a 99% chance of being right.
Exactly. But if I guess you have a loaf of sliced bread sitting on your hotel nightstand, the odds drop exponentially. It's the sheer weirdness of the detail that gives it weight as proof. It anchors the reading in reality.
It implies that the viewer isn't just making educated guesses based on probability. They are genuinely seeing something specific that defies normal vacation behavior.
Precisely. And speaking of specific locations, we should probably talk about the marketplace.
Right. Seth describes a strange marketplace that does not sell vegetables.
Which is a very odd distinction to make unprompted. Usually the word market implies food, produce, fish, especially down in the Caribbean.
Yeah, I'm going to the market to get dinner. That's standard usage of the word.
But Seth explicitly narrows it down. Market, no vegetables.
And what was the verification on that?
The Gallaghers had visited the famous Nassau straw market. It was completely full of native women weaving baskets, hats, and bags. There were no vegetables, just straw goods.
So again, a really strong visual hit. He sees the market structure, he sees the stalls, the selling, the commerce, but he correctly identifies that the actual content of the market isn't food.
It strongly suggests a visual component to the remote viewing phenomenon. It's as if the consciousness is hovering right there, looking around the stalls and saying, well, it looks like a market layout, but where are the tomatoes? I don't see any tomatoes here, just a bunch of hats.
I'm looking for the produce section, but it's literally just purses.
Exactly. It implies a conscious observer. It implies someone, or something, is actually looking at the live scene and reporting back, rather than just throwing out the word market and hoping for a hit.
Okay, so we have the Prince George, St. George connection, we have the scooter rental plan, the loaf of bread, and the straw market. That is a seriously strong opening. But it wasn't all perfect, right? I know there was some confusion about the geography of the islands.
Yes, and this is a very common issue in remote viewing experiments. It's often referred to as the mirroring effect, or directional dyslexia. Seth mentions a tour that they took to the south, perhaps by boat and bus.
And where did they actually go?
They went to Paradise Island. That trip involved a boat and a vehicle, just as Seth described. But Paradise Island is located to the north of Nassau, not the south.
So the event itself was right. The boat, the bus, the island trip, but the compass direction was flipped.
Correct. It's fascinating because the core experience was captured perfectly. They were on a boat, they were moving towards an island, but the spatial orientation relative to the main island was inverted. It's exactly like looking at a map in a mirror.
Why does that happen, though? Is it because the viewer is just disoriented floating around?
There are a few working theories on that. One is that in the trance state, or the dream state, spatial directions are largely symbolic or subjective. South might just symbolize down or away to the subconscious. Another theory is that the medium's physical brain actually flips the incoming image, much like a camera lens flips an image before the brain automatically corrects it.
So Jane's brain got the raw data and just accidentally slapped the north sticker on the south side of the image.
Possibly. But despite that directional error, the actual content of the trip was heavily verified.
But then there's the Grenada connection. This one really blew my mind when I was reading through the source notes, because this one feels fundamentally different than just looking at a straw market.
It is different. This is arguably one of the strongest hits in the entire session, in my opinion. Seth says, a place that sounds like Grenada that has a connection with nuts, exports nuts, I believe.
Now, for anyone who doesn't know their Caribbean geography off the top of their head, Grenada is way, way down south, like near Venezuela. The Gallaghers are up in the Bahamas. They did not go anywhere near Grenada on this trip.
Correct. So at first glance, this looks like a massive miss. A skeptic would jump on this and say, oh, look, he sees the completely wrong island. He's looking at Grenada. They are in Nassau. 0 points.
But when Bill and Peg looked at this transcript, their jaws practically dropped.
Because of a very specific fleeting conversation they had. They were sitting there in Nassau, chatting casually with a woman they had just met. She was English. And they asked her a simple question. They asked, what is your absolute favorite island in the Caribbean?
And what did she say?
Her exact words back to them were, without question, Grenada.
Grenada. So Seth didn't see the physical location of the Gallaghers. He heard the exact word that was being emphasized in their conversation at that time.
This shifts our entire understanding of what is actually happening in this session. This isn't just remote viewing where you fly around like a drone and look at a map from above. This is telepathy. Seth tuned directly into their auditory experience, or perhaps their immediate thoughts. The word Grenada was highly significant in their minds at that exact moment because of the intensity of that conversation.
It really blurs the line, doesn't it? Is he seeing the physical world around them, or is he just reading their minds?
In the Seth Material, those lines are constantly blurred. Seth argues extensively that consciousness is primary. The physical world and the mental world are completely woven together. So picking up on a spoken word like Grenada is just as real to him as picking up on a physical object like a loaf of bread.
And what about the nuts part of that quote? He said, exports nuts.
That is the cherry on top of the whole thing. Grenada is famously known globally as the Isle of Spice. Specifically, it is one of the world's largest exporters of nutmeg.
Nutmeg, nuts.
Right, so Seth extracted the name Grenada from the audio of their conversation and then simultaneously accessed the broader concept or the factual trivia associated with Grenada, which is that it exports nuts.
Wow. So he didn't just hear the word echo in their heads, he basically Googled it on the astral plane.
In a cosmic sense, yes. He accessed the Universal Encyclopedia entry for the word he just intercepted. Grenada, searching, result, nutmeg.
Okay, that's really deep. It implies a multi-layered processing of information. It's not just a passive camera feed. It's an active, smart search engine.
It really is.
Ugh.
But to be completely fair to the scientific process and to our listeners, we do have to look at the other side of the ledger. We promised an unbiased look at the data. It wasn't all perfect hits. There were some things that just didn't land at all.
Right. We absolutely have to acknowledge the misses, or at least the completely unverified elements of the transcript. For instance, Seth mentions a dim connection with the Roman poet Ovid.
Ovid. The Gallaghers looked at that and said, no. They had absolutely no connection to Ovid on the trip. No books, no conversations, nothing.
Denied. No Ovid. Then there was a very detailed description of a specific restaurant. Seth saw a 7 o'clock appointment, white decor all over, white waiter uniforms, and a girl with red fringes.
Sounds like a very fancy place.
But the Gallaghers couldn't place it at all. They completely denied it.
Which is incredibly interesting because it's such a vivid, specific image. Was it a glimpse of someone else's vacation bleeding through? Or just a psychic distortion? We really don't know.
And then we get to my personal favorite of all the misses, Ubango.
Yes, the Ubango sign. Seth says, a sign lit up in the center of a palm tree out front. Somehow the letter U is prominent. For example, though this is not the name, Ubango.
Ubango. It sounds like a bad tropical fruit juice or some failed 80s dance craze. Everybody do the Ubango.
It definitely has a certain rhythm to it. Seth specifically notes that Ubango isn't the actual name, but that it sounds remarkably like that or features a massive letter U. But the Gallaghers had absolutely no idea what this meant.
Just blank stares when they read that part.
They denied seeing any neon sign remotely like that. They denied hearing the word.
And he also saw ramshackle buildings on stilts, right?
Which they also completely denied seeing. They were staying in a fairly nice developed part of Nassau.
So what exactly do we make of these misses? I mean, if he can see the loaf of gun so perfectly clearly, why is he seeing a non-existent Ubango sign in a palm tree? Is the entity hallucinating?
This is the million-dollar question in parapsychology. There are a few strong possibilities here. One, it's just pure noise, static in the signal.
Like when a radio station fades out as you drive and you just hear a crackle of nonsense.
Exactly. The signal degrades. Possibility two is the interpreter theory. Jane Roberts' brain received a vague impression of a foreign word, maybe a local Bohemian dialect word she didn't consciously know, and her brain panicked, tried to scramble for a phonetic match, and just spit out the nonsense word Ubango.
Like a terrible autocorrect fail.
Precisely. A psychic autocorrect fail. But there's a third, really compelling possibility we have to consider.
Which is?
That the Gallaghers actually saw it, but didn't consciously notice it.
The subliminal perception angle.
Think about it. You walk down a busy street in a foreign country on vacation. You pass 100 different signs, 1,000 tiny details. Your conscious mind actively filters out 99% of them so you don't go completely crazy from sensory overload. But your subconscious records everything perfectly.
So I might be walking past a bright neon sign that says Urbaningo or something similar, and I don't even register it because I'm looking for a taxi. But Seth, who is scanning my mind, sees the raw, unfiltered visual data.
Exactly. If you asked me 2 weeks after a trip, hey, did you see a sign with a big U on it? I'd say no, absolutely not. But a deep psychic sweep might pick up on that subliminal data, the exact things your eye physically saw, but your brain immediately discarded. The ramshackle buildings on stilts might have just been in the blurry background of a fast taxi ride, totally unnoticed by Bill and Peg, but vivid and stationary to the scanning consciousness.
So the misses might not actually be misses at all. They might just be unverified sightings.
That is the inherent challenge of verification in these experiments. You are ultimately relying on the conscious memory of the human subject, and human memory is notoriously terrible and fallible.
That's a really fair point. We trust the Gallaghers, to be honest, but they are just human. They might have simply forgotten the Ubango sign, but even with the static and the Ubango mystery, the hits continue to pile up. And as we move forward into sessions 296 and 297, the weirdness level really escalates. We stop talking about bread and we start talking about literal rocket science.
Literally rocket science. This is where the personal vacation story suddenly intersects with major world history. Let's talk about the rocket launch.
Oh man, this is where it gets into almost government conspiracy territory for a second.
In session 295, Seth throws out a very weird, isolated image. He just mentions a chain and a rocket. Just those simple words, chain, rocket.
At the time that session was recorded, that means absolutely nothing to anyone in the room. It's gibberish.
But then, in session 296, he elaborates and mentions a distinct change in plans regarding their flight plans.
And the verification for that.
Bill Gallagher confirmed in writing that their plane, their commercial flight home or between the islands, had to dramatically change course. It was actively diverted midair.
And why was it diverted?
Because of a literal rocket launching at Cape Kennedy over in Florida.
That is just incredibly specific. A massive rocket launch actively diverting a commercial passenger flight.
It anchors the entire timeline perfectly in reality. It's a massive external event, fully verifiable by aviation flight logs, verifiable by historical news reports, that directly impacted their personal, individual experience. Seth picked up on the grand rocket symbol and perfectly connected it to their personal change in plans.
This wasn't just something happening quietly inside their heads or in a hotel room. This was a massive physical event happening hundreds of miles away in Florida that rippled out across the sky and touched their vacation.
And Seth caught that exact ripple. He connected the personal inconvenience of the flight diversion with the macro cause of the rocket.
And he connected it to Bill specifically. Speaking of Bill, Seth seems to have a bit of a fixation on him throughout these sessions. He has a very specific nickname for him, right?
He does. He repeatedly calls him the Jesuit.
The Jesuit. Is Bill an actual priest? Is he walking around the beach in a clerical collar?
No, Bill is just a regular guy. But Seth is a personality who perceives deep character traits, arguably past lives, or at least deep psychological archetypes in people. He perceives a certain philosophical, perhaps slightly dogmatic or intensely intellectual quality in Bill's mind. So he just labels him the Jesuit.
It's like a psychic gamer tag.
Exactly, the Jesuit 66. But he refers to the Jesuit thinking strongly about computers.
Computers in 1966. That is not a common household topic of conversation. Most normal people didn't even know what a computer really was back then, other than maybe a room-sized calculator used by the military.
It was incredibly cutting edge. It was a very niche topic. But Seth says the Jesuit, meaning Bill, thinks strongly how computers could change the islands. Discusses this with some heat.
With some heat, like an intense, passionate debate.
And Bill completely verified this. He noted that he discussed exactly this highly specific topic, how computer mainframes could theoretically modernize the banking and tourism systems of the Caribbean islands, with a random man they met on the trip.
So Seth is actively listening in on their private conversations again. First, the Grenada comment, now this intense debate about computers.
It really seems the auditory channel was wide open during this part of the trip. He is tapping directly into the dialogue.
What I love about this is just the raw specificity of the topic. If Seth had said Bill talked about the weather or Bill talked about the hotel food, that's nothing. But saying Bill argued passionately about the socioeconomic impact of computers on Caribbean infrastructure in 1966, that is a definitive fingerprint. You cannot guess that.
It's an absolute fingerprint. And speaking of physical fingerprints and hands, let's look closely at the torn notebook incident.
This is one of those real zoom-in moments in the transcript. It feels exactly like a close-up in a movie camera.
It really does.
Yeah.
Seth describes a torn page of a pad or notebook, numbers written on it in his handwriting. Bill confirmed that he tore a single page out of his pocket notebook to quickly write down the addresses and phone numbers of people they just met.
See, that is so cinematic. It's an extreme close-up shot. Hands tearing a small piece of paper, the physical sound of the rip, writing numbers down. It's so incredibly mundane, but Seth sees it in perfect high definition.
It strongly reinforces the idea that absolutely nothing is hidden. Even your discarded scrap paper is entirely visible to this non-local awareness.
Yeah.
It's not just the big, emotional life moments that radiate outward, it's the tiny debris of everyday life.
And speaking of emotional moments, we have to talk about the choir turnabout. This one sounds like a literal plot twist.
It is a plot twist of the mind. In session 296, Seth describes an episode at a local church. He specifically mentions small boys and a complete turnabout.
Now, turnabout usually implies a reversal of some kind, a U-turn, or a sudden surprise.
Correct. The Gallaghers confirmed in their log that they stopped at a local church to listen to a choir practice.
Okay, so the church and the choir are correct. That's a solid location hit.
But here is the brilliant nuance. They expected to see a choir of children, small boys. That was their mental assumption walking through the church doors.
Okay.
But they were genuinely surprised, hence the turnabout, that it was actually a choir of young adults singing.
So Seth picked up on the internal cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. He saw the internal expectation of small boys and the external reality of young adults and the mental clash between those two things. Turnabout is the absolutely perfect word for it. It describes the internal mental state of the Gallaghers. We thought X, but it was actually Y. Seth perfectly captured that psychological pivot.
It really emphasizes that he's not just passively watching a video feed of their lives. He's actively feeling what they're feeling. He is experiencing their momentary surprise.
Which naturally brings us to the humor of the entity. Seth isn't just a cold, robotic observer taking notes. He has a distinct personality. And he actively makes jokes. He makes terrible puns.
The stew pun. I physically groaned when I read this in the notes.
It is the ultimate dad joke from the spirit realm. Seth says, they fidget, stew. I did not know if they stew or if they eat stew, you see.
I love that so much. He's openly admitting a limitation in his own translation software. He gets the raw conceptual word stew, but he doesn't know if it's the emotion like stewing and anger or impatience or the physical food like a bowl of beef stew.
It shows a real playfulness. He's fully aware of the linguistic ambiguity, and he just pokes fun at it.
Did they actually eat stew or were they just angry?
The record on that one is a hard no for the eating part. But the fidgeting and stewing might have been general travel restlessness, maybe waiting around for that diverted rocket plane, perhaps. But the pun itself gives us incredible insight into how the information is actually received by the medium. Often as raw symbols or words that desperately need interpretation, he receives the symbol stew and has to guess the context on the fly.
It makes the entity feel so much more person-like, less like some infallible mystical god on a mountain, and much more like a regular guy trying to solve a confusing crossword puzzle.
Which is exactly how Seth consistently presents himself throughout the material, as a learner, a curious explorer of reality.
Now, as we move forward into session 297, the Gallaghers are back home, or in the process of getting back, and the entire focus of the reading shifts. It abruptly stops being about the sunny, relaxed Bahamas and starts being about, well, real life.
The real world always creeps back in. Seth starts picking up on the heavy psychic atmosphere waiting for them at home. The carefree vacation vibe is completely gone.
He specifically mentions an unpleasant episode and a matter of money.
Universal human themes, sadly, but heavily verified by the couple. It was directly related to a brother-in-law, significant legal fees they were dealing with, and a rich account.
And then he uses the phrase, a fly-by-night outfit. That is a very specific colloquial idiom to drop.
It is. Seth says fly-by-night outfit. Peg, Bill's wife, verified that this was directly related to her extremely poor opinion of a specific hospital that was currently treating a sister-in-law. She viewed the hospital's administration as totally incompetent, literally a fly-by-night operation.
And he also says, a grab bag.
Peg interpreted this phrase as grab in terms of deep financial greed regarding that exact same sister-in-law situation.
So we immediately go from sunny beaches to money, hospitals, and greed. The vacation is definitively over. Welcome home, Gallaghers.
It actually acts as a brilliant scientific control for the experiment, in a weird way. The remote viewing successfully followed them from the distinctive, relaxed environment of the Bahamas back to the highly distinct, stressful, emotional environment of their domestic issues. The signal itself remained perfectly strong. Just the content of the transmission changed to match their reality.
It's endlessly fascinating. You know, when you take a step back and look at the final scorecard of this whole Gallagher test, it's genuinely impressive.
It really is. If we just review the major hits again. The Prince George Hotel connection. The clear intent to rent scooters, the loaf of bread in the room, the straw market with no vegetables, the Grenada conversation, the rocket launch flight diversion, the torn page from the notebook.
And of course, we acknowledge the misses, to be fair. Ubango, the Ovid connection, the mysterious white restaurant.
But the ratio of hits to misses, and specifically the extremely high quality of those hits, I mean, the statistical impossibility of guessing loaf of bread in a hotel room and rocket launch diversion in the exact same weekend, it statistically defies any claim of pure coincidence. You simply cannot explain this away as lucky guessing.
It really forces you to confront the fundamental nature of consciousness. And that is the genuinely chilling part for me. It's not just cool parlor tricks or party games. It implies something massive and fundamental about how the universe actually operates.
It strongly suggests that we are not sealed inside our skulls like we think we are. Our private thoughts, our casual conversations, our discarded scraps of paper, they're all constantly broadcasting. We are continuously transmitting data into the ether.
It brings up a really intense question. If Seth, or whatever grand consciousness he represents, can easily travel to the Bahamas in 1966 just to stare at a loaf of bread on a table, what exactly is being seen right now?
We so often think of privacy as physical walls. I close my bedroom door, therefore I am alone. But if consciousness is truly non-local, physical privacy might be a complete illusion.
That is definitely a thought to keep you up late at night. Or maybe it comforts you, like you're never actually alone in the dark.
I suppose that heavily depends on who exactly is doing the watching.
True. Very true. Well, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity today, and honestly, how could it possibly not, you really need to go directly to the source material. We are barely just scratching the surface of what is contained in these sessions. There are hundreds of pages of this specific type of data.
We strongly encourage every listener to study the Seth Material books directly for themselves. There are massive volumes of this work. It is literally a lifetime of study and analysis.
Specifically, you can find all the books and a ton more info at the New Awareness Network website. You need to go to sethcenter.com/the early sessions, go buy the books, support the publisher, and dive into these wild transcripts yourself. There's so much incredible nuance and detail that we just couldn't cover in our time today.
It is a rabbit hole completely worth falling down. I highly recommend it.
Absolutely. So here is my final provocative question for you, the listener, to chew on. We know Seth saw the bread. We know he clearly heard the word Grenada. We know he felt the emotional surprise at the choir turnabout. If your own consciousness is fundamentally capable of this, of projecting outward and retrieving distant data, what signals are you currently ignoring?
What subtle signals are you receiving right now in your own life that you are just casually dismissing as your imagination or mental static?
Maybe that completely random thought you had today about an old friend wasn't actually random at all. Maybe that weird mental image of a Ubango sign is just nonsense. But maybe, just maybe, the rest of it is entirely real.
It demands an incredibly open mind to explore.
Keep that mind open for sure. But maybe also keep your private travel plans to yourself if you don't want a disembodied entity narrating your next beach vacation.
Fair advice. Very fair advice.
Thanks so much for joining us on the deep dive today. We will see you all next time.
Goodbye, and keep looking beyond the surface.